You'll remember in Unit 4 we introduced the idea of a categorical proposition. In Unit 5 we're going to be looking at the You'll remember in Unit 4 we introduced the idea of a categorical proposition. In Unit 5 we're going to be looking at the features of a categorical syllogism. A categorical syllogism is an argument composed of categorical propositions. It's an argument that has a standard form. That means that it has two premises, both of which are categorical propositions, and one conclusion, also a categorical proposition. Categorical syllogisms, a very common way of argumentation, have two major features or properties, mood and figure, and Unit 5 gets you clear on the properties of mood and figure and their differences. The mood of a categorical syllogism is determined by the letter names of each of the premises and conclusion. The premises, you'll remember, are identified either as the major premise or the minor premise, depending upon whether the predicate term of the conclusion occurs in the premise or not. When the predicate term of the conclusion is in the premise, we're talking about the major or first premise of a syllogism, and the minor premise is the second or leftover premise. The figure is the slightly more complex feature of the categorical syllogism, and it has to do with the placement of the third term, or the so-called middle term, within the two premises of an argument. In fact, if we look over here at this fancy little diagram, this may be familiar to you. There's a similar one in your textbook. We have something that looks like a shirt collar here, and this is a nice, easy way of remembering the different figures. There are four figures, figure 1, 2, 3, and 4, and as I said, it is determined by the placement of the middle term. The M's here in these blocks stand for the middle term. Notice here, the M occurs in what is the first position, or subject position, of the first premise. It occurs in the predicate position of the second premise. This diagonal arrangement is called figure 1. When the middle term occurs in the predicate position of both of the premises, then we have a figure 2 proposition, or figure 2 syllogism. And figure 3 is the opposite of figure 2, where the middle term occurs in the subject position of each of the premises. And lastly, figure 4 is the opposite diagonal of 1, where the middle term occurs in the predicate position of the first premise, the major premise, and in the subject position of the minor premise. We'll refer back to this figure as we do some problems. Now, in the first part of Unit 5, we need to place the following arguments into standard form, and then name the mood and the figure of each of the syllogisms. Number 1, no ballerinas are clumsy people. Therefore, since no clumsy people are fat, no ballerinas are fat. Well, in doing these problems, the first thing that you need to identify is the conclusion. Look for the conclusion indicators. Here we have therefore, obviously a conclusion indicator, but notice in this question, it's followed immediately by since, which is a premise indicator. So this is a bit confusing, isn't it? What is the conclusion? Well, the real conclusion is no ballerinas are fat. Right? Therefore, no ballerinas are fat, since no clumsy people are fat. So no ballerinas are fat is our conclusion. Why we need to do that first is that will determine what the major term of the syllogism is. The major term, remember, is always the predicate term, not the subject term, but the predicate term of the conclusion. Now we go back into the argument and identify the premise which contains fat. Right, here it is. And so no clumsy people are fat is the first premise of this syllogism. Okay, and the minor premise then will obviously be what's left over. No ballerinas are clumsy. So there is the correct form of the syllogism. And now what we need to do is to determine the mood and the figure. Well, notice that both premises and conclusion are the same type of sentence. They are an E sentence, so we have E, E, E as the mood of this syllogism. And what's the figure now? Well, remember the figure is determined by the placement of the middle term, clumsy. And notice that the placement here is on the diagonal, with the first occurrence in the major premise being the subject place, and in the minor premise being in the predicate place. And that diagonal, remember, makes the first part of the shirt collar, and so this is figure 1. E, 1. Okay, not too hard. We'll do a couple more. Number 2, some meat eaters are monks and no nuns are meat eaters. Therefore, some monks are not nuns. Well, the conclusion here is obvious because of the therefore. Some monks are not nuns. That's our conclusion. This means that nuns, the predicate of the conclusion, is the major term. We go back into the premises, find the premise that contains nuns. That will be the major or first premise. So no nuns are meat eaters. The major premise. And some meat eaters are monks. Is the minor premise. We have to identify the type of these sentences now. The first or major premise is an E sentence, a negative universal. Remember the no, so we've got E. The second is a particular affirmative premise. Some meat eaters are monks, so that's an I. And the conclusion is the particular negative sentence, which is an O. So E-I-O gives you the mood. Notice, by the way, that this is the reason why you have to determine which of the premises comes first. Clearly, if you were to change the order of these, you would change the order of I and E as it occurs in the mood, and you'd end up with the wrong answer. So be sure that you get the major premise as the first premise. Now, what's the figure of this? Well, you remember have to identify the middle term, which is meat eaters, and in this case we have it running on the opposite diagonal to figure 1. That is, it makes this part of the shirt collar, as it were, and that, remember, is figure 4. I'll just show you the graph here again to remind you how this works. Notice we have on figure 4 the major premise containing the middle term as the predicate, but the minor premise contains the middle term as its subject. Okay, figure 4. All right, number 3. No taxicabs are luxurious vehicles, hence no limousines are taxis, since all limos are luxurious. Here we've got hence, the conclusion indicator, so we know no limousines are taxis is our conclusion. I'll just say limos here. No limos are taxis. That, of course, makes taxi our major term, and here it is here. So the first premise, the major premise, is no taxis are luxurious. And all limos are luxurious, then must be the minor premise. What's the mood? Well, we have 2 E sentences here, and the middle sentence is an A, the universal affirmative. So we have E A-E as the mood. And what's the figure? Well, remember we have to find the middle term. The middle term here is luxurious, and it occurs in the predicate position of each of the premises. And remember, that then makes, as it were, that part of the shirt collar, which is figure 2. So EAE2, the answer to number 3. Here's another one. 4. Some evangelists are not rapists. All rapists are sick. It follows that some evangelists are not sick. It follows that is a conclusion indicator, and so some evangelists are not sick. Is the conclusion. That makes sick, the predicate term of the conclusion, our major term. That in turn makes all rapists are sick the major premise. So that's our first one. All rapists are sick. And the middle term then must be, the middle premise must be some evangelists are not rapists. Okay, so there's the standard form for this. And now we need to figure out the mood. The mood, you'll remember, is the letter names of both premises and conclusion. So we have an A sentence as the major premise. We have some S are not P as the minor premise. That, you'll remember, is the particular negative sentence, or O. And some evangelists are not sick, the same kind of sentence, O. So we have A, O, O as the mood. What about the figure? Well, we know that rapists here must be our middle term, and notice that it occurs on this diagonal, and so you'll remember this is the figure 1 because it's like the left part of the shirt collar. So we've got AOO1 as the answer. All right, we'll do one more of these just to make sure that you have it down, and then turn to something a bit different. All cigars are deadly weapons. Therefore, some deadly weapons are smoking objects, since all cigars are smoking objects. Who said logic can't be fun? Okay, so here's therefore, the conclusion indicator. We've got some deadly weapons as the conclusion. Some deadly weapons are smoking objects. That's our conclusion. That makes smoking objects the major term. Since, of course, is a premise indicator here, so all cigars are smoking objects must be the major premise. And what's left over? All cigars are deadly weapons. Now we need to figure, since we've got the standard form, figure the mood. And we've got two A sentences here. All S are P, so we've got A. And what's the conclusion? Conclusion is I, because it is a particular affirmative sentence. Some deadly weapons are smoking. Cigars is our middle term. And you'll notice that that occurs in the subject position on both of the premises. That figure is figure 3, you'll recall. It's like the short part of the right-hand collar. And so AII3 is the correct answer for 5. Okay, well, I think you get the idea with those. Now what we're going to do is reconstruct a syllogism from the combination of mood and figure as it's given. So in effect, we'd be going backwards from the problems that we've just done. Reconstruct the syllogistic forms from the following combinations of mood and figure. AEO2. Now, where do we begin? Well, remember, first of all, that on every categorical syllogism, the conclusion will be stated in terms of S and P. That is, we'll use the letter S as the subject term of the conclusion and P as the predicate term or the major term. So the best place to start really here is with the conclusion. The conclusion of number 6 is an O sentence. So we know, since we're going to use S and P as the letters, we know the conclusion right away is some S are not P. Now, the first premise, the major premise, is an A sentence, so that must begin with all. The minor premise is an E sentence. Remember, nego, so that means that we're looking for a sentence that begins with no. But now we can't fill these in until we know what the figure is. We need to have figure 2, you should remember. Let's look at our diagram again. Figure 2 has the middle term in the predicate position of both of the premises. And now this will allow us to determine then that the M's need to go over here. And now all we have to do is fill in the S and the P into the premises. Now which goes where? Well, the P, remember, is the major term. Therefore, it must occur in the major premise. So the first premise must be all P are M. The S must occur in the minor premise, because S is the minor term. No S are M. And so here we have a standard form of a categorical syllogism that we've reconstructed from simply knowing the mood in the figure. Okay, let's do another one. EAO1. Well, we begin again with the conclusion. The conclusion is an O sentence. That is a some S are not P sentence. And remember, we're using S and P as the minor and major terms. So some S are not P is our conclusion. Now, the first or major premise has to be an E sentence. Remember, nego. The E in nego refers to the universal negative sentence, so we know we want this major premise to begin with no. The minor premise is an A sentence, and that is a sentence that begins with all. And now we have to remember the figure. Figure 1, you'll recall, is the figure in which the middle term is on the diagonal running this way. That is, it starts in the major premise in the subject, so we have an M here, no M are, and in the minor premise we have all blank are M. So the M is figure 1. And now remember, we want to put P in the major premise, so no M or P. We want S, the minor term, to occur in the minor premise, so S is then in the subject position here. So no M or P, all S are M, and some S are not P is an EAO1 categorical syllogism. And let's do one more just to make sure. IAI4. Okay, once more, conclusion first. We want an I sentence for the conclusion, and we're using S and P, remember. An I sentence is the particular affirmative sentence, so some S are P is the conclusion. The first premise or major premise has to be an I sentence, just like the conclusion was, so we know that will begin with some. And the minor premise is an A or all sentence, so that starts with all. Now what about figure 4? Figure 4, remember, goes on a diagonal this way, so that means that the middle term, the M term, occurs as the predicate of the major premise, but it occurs as the subject of the minor premise. And we remember also want to use the major term P in the major premise, so sum P R M is our first premise. All M R S is our minor premise, and sum S R P. Well, that's it. I told you before, Unit 4 and 5 are the easy units in this course, so I hope you don't have much trouble with them. Get prepared, though. Unit 6 is a bit harder. We'll see you then.